today's class, like I told you, is about repotting larger orchids and how to divide them, how to divide them correctly so that you get a strong enough plant that it will grow out a new growth and bloom the next year. Okay? If you divide it wrong and divide a division that's too small, it will not bloom for several years. Some of these orchids, if you get them really mad, won't bloom for 3 or 4 years. So, obviously you can see from that mess up on that table that it's been a while since some of those plants have been repotted. You'll see them overgrowing the sides of the pot, where they actually grow over the side. You can't see the pot anymore. Some of them, you know, the pot has broken and you know it's time to repot it, clean it up, and then put it in the new pot and, you know, try and get it happy. When you're repotting, it's time to clean up the old back bulbs, okay? You can see by this first one, it's got a lot of old back bulbs on it. All of these need to be cleaned out. You need to go back in and get a couple of new front growths and get them potted up to continue this. If you let this go, if I let this go any longer, I'm gonna start losing it. So.
What do you mean by cleaned out?
Cut them off.
Oh, cut them off.
Take them off, yeah. And we'll do that with one of the orchids. Now, when you're repotting also, watch your orchids because a lot of them are spiking. That means they're starting to flower. You don't want to repot any of the Cattleya family or dendrobiums when they're starting to spike. This was a candidate for repotting today. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, and probably a couple more flower spikes developing on that. So I don't want to disturb it until it's done flowering. Then it can be repotted. You can take it apart, divide it, and repot it. If you look at that, it's in a little 5-inch pot. This was a gift from a friend of mine who gave this to me. It's a special orchid. It's a Shambo cat, but obviously you can tell it needs a little work. It needs to be cleaned up and it'll be just fine. I can very easily, once I go to divide this, get probably 4 plants out of this when I'm done.
If I saw that, I would throw it away. No, that.
What's wrong with you? Really? You just hurt his feelings.
And throwing things.
How come you didn't cut the spikes, the dead spikes off?
Lazy.
So we should cut them off.
Yeah, the old spikes, I'll clean up the old spikes on it. I was hoping maybe it would bloom for a show, but we're looking probably at about another month, month and a half before that flowers. So I'll leave it alone and just take it to the new house when I'm done. How many of you know that I was getting ready to move? 600 orchids are sitting out back. They're getting ready to go to the new house. So keep your hands off my orchids, lady. These are my orchids. These are not busy bees. He who dies with the most wins. That's John Odom's motto, not mine. Okay, let's get into it. The fun part of it is dividing it, trying to figure out how many pieces or pseudobulbs you cut off to make a substantial division, okay? If you cut off, like I said, if you cut too little off, that orchid is going to struggle. And I'll show you when I do one of these. I'm not sure which one I'm going to do. That one's going to take me at least an hour to get through. That one's severely overgrown. They're examples, but I'll show you. This one is a good example. It's really easy, very easy to go back through it. It has obviously grown out of the pot. It's hanging on its side. This is one of those, even though it's got a flower on it. This is a Schomburgkia and Cattleya cross. So, you know, Cattleya and Schomburgkia crosses tend to get a lot bigger. Very easy thing to do to repot it. You can tell that it's obviously been in there. That's Orchiata. It's been in there for 5 years. that bark is still pretty substantial. All right. One of the things with Orchiata and the orchid barks I want to tell you guys about. And my method of potting has always been to put styrofoam peanuts in the bottom. Are we? We gonna get a little shower? So, no, this is Alexis Pardo, really? Okay. I didn't see that coming. I thought it was Cupid's arrow. Huh. Okay. This is actually named after a good friend, and who actually passed away probably 5 years ago. Very nice little Shambo cat. Like I said, when it's time to repot and divide, I am not gentle. I'll go through and tear it up, clean everything off the roots, and it's gonna go right back in its original pot, okay? You can take the pot, scrub it, and clean it. Would I take that pot and use it with another orchid? No, but I can use it back with this pot.
Why? Why wouldn't you use it with another orchid?
Well, if this orchid has, say, virus, or it has a fungal problem that you don't know about, or it has some type of pest in there that you don't catch, it will transfer. Anytime you divide orchids and you go into repotting them, putting them in new pots, you want to go into a new clean pot, or it goes back into its old original pot, okay? Now you can see that's a mess. I mean, it really is a mess. So what you want to do is clean it up. Now remember, I told you when you divide it, you want to take a division that's big enough to keep that plant happy and healthy so that it will bloom again next year. Yes, ma'am?
Does it go through a shock when you?
Yes. Every time you repot the Cattleya family, they will go through a shock period. Usually about 6 months, and they'll bounce right back out of it.
What about the Dendrobium and the Phalaenopsis? Do they shock when
Fails,
plant them?
fails do not. Dens really shock. Dendrobiums will shock very hard on the hard canes. The soft canes, like the little Dendrobium noble, not so much. How many of you use clippers? How many of you use straight edge razor blades?
Clippers.
All right, razor blades. Be careful with these things. You can cut yourself really badly with this. I did one time. I sliced my thumb right down the middle. Not a pleasant feeling. And there was blood everywhere. Remember when I told you guys when it's time to divide them, you want to take a division that's big enough for the plant to be able to produce a new growth and bloom the next year. So what you're looking for are the pseudobulbs. The orchid has a front and a back. The back is going to be the old growth. The front is going to be where the new growth is. Okay? From that new growth, you want to count back 4 or 5 bulbs, pseudobulbs. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, say 6 right there. This is where it gets tricky. One division. That plant now is going to be big enough and strong enough to rebloom next year. Okay? Now, when I go to repot it, and I'll repot it in just a second. With the pseudobulbs, remember these act as batteries. They store food and water for the front of the plant. The more of these batteries you have on that plant, the more leaves you have, the better chance it is to feed itself, or the better the ability it has to feed itself. You've got a plant that still has leaves on it, okay? This thing will still produce a new growth off the front of these pseudobulbs. Once you take the front of the plant off, it's going to wake up the eyes on the back, and they're going to put out new growth. So now you're going to have 2 plants. This is how you get multiple orchids. All right, now the way it looks, with all the roots growing every which way because it hung down over the pot, I'm going to cut it back and try and clean it up. 1, 2, 3, 4. Where is that one going? There was a gentleman in Melbourne named Joe Grizzoffi that all of his orchids were grown by division. He didn't clone anything. So if you got a plant from Joe, you knew it was a piece of the original. I had the I had the misfortune to have to repot some of his plants. And the roots on those pots, the plants were completely covering the pot, and there was a rat tail about this long of just solid roots, about that big around. And the first thing we had to do is cut the roots off of it, and then try and pull them out and separate them and take them apart and figure out where to cut it. And yeah, it took me 6 months to probably get through, I would say 200 pots, if that, because they were that big and that overgrown. So like I said, with these razor blades, be very careful. You can cut yourself very badly. Cutting the rhizome. Okay. Come on out of there. Now, you see the rest of that? That's garbage. That's trash. It's not going to do anything. It doesn't have enough leaves. The pseudobulbs are all shriveled up. That's garbage. Don't even entertain the idea. I mean, if you're desperate, you could probably try putting it on a mount, watering it all the time. It could probably do something, but I don't waste my time. I've got too many other orchids to deal with. I've got 2 divisions here now that can be repotted. Okay. When you repot these guys and you get them out of the pot, you've got this long tangle of roots. Sometimes it's hard to get that back in the pot. So now here's a little trick too. On the back end of there, there's 1 leaf hanging off in a bad spot. So I've still got 4 bulbs on there. It's still a strong enough plant to be able to put out new growth for the new year. All right, where's that new growth going to come from? There's a little eye right there that should wake up. There's another eye here that will probably wake up. If you want to pass that around, you can see them. They're little itty bitty triangles there and there. Don't bump the eyes, leave them on the plant, because that's my new growth. Now, with the roots, if you get a big tangle of roots, how do you get it back in the pot with all the orchid bark? I know who that voice was. Why do you terrorize your orchids like that?
Because I'm gentle like
Look, I used to see Tom Ritter up in Orlando take a big plant like this, and it would be full of bark on the roots. He would take a long flathead screwdriver and just start whacking at it to get all the bark off the roots of that plant. Don't do that. Sherry's right. You do want to cut the roots off. You want I usually hold my fingers up about 4 inches. Space my fingers out, hold it at the base, 4 inches. Anything longer than that gets cut off.
Does it stimulate new growth?
Yes, it does stimulate new growth. It stimulates them to put out new roots.
Is that just for camellias or
For all orchids. Phalaenopsis, you don't have to do that. I mean, I do trim the roots on phales because the roots on phales can get like this when they're in a pot with moss. So I will, if I'm trying to get it back in a pot, I will trim it back. They will put out new growth. Now, new growth and new roots. Remember, the new roots are going to come off the new growth. That's what's going to lock it into the pot. What these roots are going to do is hold it in the pot with the bark so that it gets a chance to get established. Okay? Now, this plant was in a 6-inch standard orchid clay pot. All right? I'm going to do one more thing. Because it's a bigger division, I'm going to take one more pseudobulb off. Because what I'm looking for is to make sure, and now I've got a plant that's going to go off in this direction and it's going to go off in this direction. So when I put this back in the pot, you're going to put it back here at the edge so it grows into the pot, okay? You don't want to put it here where it just grows right back out of the pot. You want to put the end that you cut off back up against the back edge, okay? Now, once you put it in there, how do you keep it locked in? Clips, orchid clips, rhizome clips. I ordered these by the package of 50. All right, this is a standard orchid rhizome clip for clay pots. All right, this is what's going to lock that thing back down in that pot. Okay, sometimes they're a little bit loose. You have to bend them a little bit so that they clamp down on the pot. I tend to like to bend mine down a little bit. All right, now when I do repot, I'll go through and typically wash it out, but I don't have a hose back here to do that with this. I'll go through and try and get as much organic material back out of there, just clean it up a little bit. I'm going to be a little freewheeling with this. When you do, who knows what cinnamon's for? I know you do, Sherry. Stop. Cinnamon is an antibacterial, antifungal agent. You have an open wound on your orchid, all right? Every time you cut on an orchid, you get an open wound. If you sprinkle a little bit of cinnamon on there, that seals that wound and stops it from getting fungus or rot, okay? Now to get this thing back in there, like we were talking about, guys, I'm using Orchiata, Hydroton, the clay balls, and perlite in my mix, okay? That promotes drainage. I am a heavy waterer. Yes, ma'am? No, on the roots I don't. Those roots are gonna die and it's gonna put out new roots. So I do it on the wound on the plant itself, but not so much on the roots, okay? Now, when you repot this, when do you water it? How soon after you repot do you water? No. Wait 4 days before you water. Give these wounds a chance to seal up, okay? What's the worst part about water? It transmits fungus and rot. So if you take an orchid with a fresh cut on it and you go to repot it, put it in the pot, and then you start watering it, you're possibly introducing pathogens to that plant. Give that plant a chance to heal up. It'll be just fine. I could take this plant and leave it on the bench for a month and it would be fine and not even worry about it. And then when I see new growth popping out on it, I could repot it and it would be ready to go. How many of you have been down to Odom's Orchids in Fort Pierce? Okay, you've seen his potting area? He'll go through and orchids in there. When they start repotting, they will repot everything. They'll take it out of the pots. They'll divide them up, chop them up into pieces, and they'll lay them in stacks on the benches. And they'll be there for a week, maybe 2 weeks. It depends on how much time they have to get the stuff repotted. It does not hurt them one bit. Remember, these are batteries, so they store food and water for the plant, okay? Now, like I said, when you go to put it in here, put it in the back. So when you put it in there, and I'm pretty liberal with this, I'm not being gentle at all.
Wouldn't that be considered overpotted though?
No, this is an orchid for a 6-inch pot. Now, if I were to take this and put this in an 8 or a 10 inch, it would possibly be over potting it, yes. It's gonna languish. It's gonna struggle. Orchids like to be a little bit root bound. They don't like to be over potted. So when you're repotting, if I were to take this out and repot the whole thing, I would step it up to the next size up pot and repot it. But my intention with this is to divide it, give it a chance to get going again, and make it happy. All right. When I go to put the rhizome clip in, you'll see the rhizome starts here at the pot and it goes back along this way and it comes out this way. I'm going to take this clip and lay it over the top of those rhizomes. And it's done. All right. Now, can I use this razor blade on a different plant? No. Right. Once you use it on one plant, throw it away. It's not worth the risk of introducing virus from one plant to another. Now, I will warn you, some of the older orchid growers have virus in their collections. They don't test all their plants. I am very careful with my plants about using clippers. I tend to like to use the single edge razor blades. Now, if I have something that's really big and it's got a bigger rhizome on it and I can't get that clip, I'll go back to my orchid clips. So, yes, you had a question.
Sterilize it with Clorox or something?
Not the razor blade, no. It's not worth it. The clippers I sterilize with this. Seriously. An open flame is going to sterilize your tools faster than anything else. Alcohol will do it, but the clippers have to sit in it for 20 to 30 minutes. Clorox bleach is going to rust the heck out of your tools. The torch is instantaneous. You get that in there long enough and heat it up, there's nothing on there left to infect the orchid. I can't hear you, I'm sorry. No. No. You can buy, if you're scared of the plumber's torch, I mean, all it is, honestly, is you turn a valve on. You just turn a valve on and squeeze a trigger. That's it. Just don't brand yourself. Don't laugh, I've seen it happen. All right, you notice I put this with the tines off the table. That's a plastic table, those tines are hot. Yeah, we know what's gonna happen. Now at that point, you know, it's sterile. I can clean the plant up a little bit, and it's ready to go. What's the one thing that you wanna do when you've got an orchid collection and you're trying to keep track of everything? Name tags. All right, name tags. This is obviously this is an orchid that, well, let's see, is there a date on it? Last time this was potted was back in 2013. It's been that long since this was repotted, okay? That's what Orchiata does for you. You don't have to repot every 2 years. Repotting typically is gonna be for several reasons. It's either outgrown the pot or the media has started to rot and it's rotting your roots off that plant, okay? At that point is when you want to repot, all right? That one's done. Good to go. It's ready to go for the next growth. Yes, ma'am.
Well, you're saying Orchiata, but what you have in the bin there is Orchiata with
Hydroton and perlite.
perlite.
I mix that up because like I said, I am a very heavy waterer. I grow a lot of Vandas, and my Shambo cats and my cats are with the Vandas. So they get all that water every day like the Vandas do. So I'm a heavy waterer. I want to make sure that they dry out. The Hydroton and the perlite is going to make sure that they actually dry out and they have a chance to dry the roots out so I don't rot the roots off of it and kill it. When you water that much, you will kill the plant with that much water. That's why I use a really airy mix that will dry out quicker. And I will go into clay pots, not plastic.
Is hydroton the same as Aliflor?
Yes. Hydroton, it's two different brand names. Aliflor is a little more irregularly shaped. Hydroton is a round ball. Hydroton is what they use in hydroponics. Aliflor is the old standard that we used to get from South America that had the irregular shapes that would lock together. Now, if I had Aliflor and I knew I was growing with the Vandas, this stuff, I would grow my cats probably in more Aliflor. I have to be honest with you, Orchiata, this stuff is incredible. For every 1 bag of the Better Grow potting mix, all right, for every bag of Orchiata on the small bags, you're gonna buy 2 to 3 of these. All right.
What makes it last so long?
It's a much denser orchid bark. It's a fir bark. And it comes out of New Zealand. So it's not easy to find. There are only a few places that are selling it. That is strictly all I use now. Unless I'm growing Dendrobium nobles and then I'm growing them in sphagnum moss.
And will Busy Bee start to carry it?
Orchiata, we do carry it. We do have it in stock, yes.
Do you have the other stuff too? The hydriata?
No, the hydroton stuff you're gonna have to get from one of the orchid supply dealers at the show.
Not related to repotting, but what does it mean when an orchid leaf turns black? It's in a pot.
I'm sorry?
What does it mean when an orchid leaf turns black when it's in a pot?
If that leaf is turned black and it's in a pot, you've got rot or fungus, more than likely black rot.
Okay.
So watch your watering and you're gonna need to treat it with a fungicide, okay? So let's get back into repotting. So, quick question? Okay. All right. Okay.
A quick question. I have Phalaenopsis. Is anything you're saying related to them?
Not really, because they don't get big like this. Now, Phalaenopsis you can repot once they get bigger. You know, most of the phales that we carry, those are small baby plants. I mean, I've seen Phalaenopsis with a leaf spread like this with 4 and 5 flower spikes on them. So you can get a very large Phalaenopsis. They're not throwaway plants. Keep them going.
What about if the roots are coming out off this side?
Then you can repot it. Sure, sure.
Similar potting and all?
Similar potting, you want to trim the roots up just like you would with these guys. And then depending on where you're growing it, if you're growing it outside where it gets rained on, grow it in bark. If you're growing it under like a patio roof or something, grow it in moss. It's less work. You only have to water it maybe once a week. Okay?
You follow the same rules that you use with this orchid for those as well?
I'm sorry?
You follow the same rules with that type of orchid as you do with the one that you just showed us?
Well, the Phalaenopsis is a little bit different. The different watering requirements. Most of the phales that we get are grown in moss now. So, you know, you can water them once a week or once every 2 weeks, depending on how quickly they dry out.
I have one that's on steroids in a basket. It's just gone absolutely crazy. I need to get it out of there and separate it out. And I'll probably get, I'm going to guess, 6 to 8 plants out of it.
Cattleya or Dendrobium?
Dendrobium.
Dendrobium. Be careful with Dendrobiums. They like to be really root bound. They don't like to have their roots really messed with.
It's so happy. It's like too happy.
Yeah. You can divide it.
Where it's hanging.
You can divide it and get divisions off of it. There is a Dendrobium up here that, like I said, when is it time to repot?
When your pot's broken.
And that's in Orchiata. Again, in Orchiata. I'm not sure when it was repotted last. This came from H&R Orchids out of Hawaii. It's a little Laternia type Dendrobium. It's obviously in a broken pot. This is when you know it's time to divide. Now this is, for this size plant, this is a good size specimen. What do you see the most on it that's the most striking? It's all pseudobulbs with no leaves. That's also an indication that it's time to repot. The plant's gotten too big, it just can't support itself. It needs to be cleaned up. It needs to be divided. You get the front ends going, and then this thing's going to break into 2 plants right here. With a plant like this, you can spend a little time and go through and really try and clean it up. Try and get rid of some of the old pseudobulbs. You want to look for the new growth, because that's where you're going to get your new growth and make that plant happy again. Now, because this thing's so overgrown, it's hard to tell where the pseudobulbs start and end in this. And that's what this class is about. Don't be shy or nervous about dividing a plant like this. You may lose a couple of pseudobulbs when you divide it, but the front end of that orchid should take back over and just grow perfectly without a problem. All right. Now remember, I use these on another orchid, right? Got to sterilize them in between plants. I bought these clippers at Garden Fest, what, 5 years ago? They've been the best clippers I've ever bought. I looked for him again this year. I wanted to buy a couple of new pairs, and he wasn't there. So is there anybody here with the Ladies Garden Club? You know who that one vendor was that had all those ratchet tools and stuff? Please bring him back. These tools are incredible. All right, so I'm gonna go in, and I'm probably gonna lose some pseudobulbs. I'm gonna cut them off, not on purpose, but by accident. Okay. Now you're going to see the old dead pseudobulbs coming out. I can still get the rest of that crud off that roots, what's left of the root system. There's not much left there. Okay, but I have one new growth here, one new growth here. Because we did the division, you've got a bulb here that will probably pop out a new growth. And one here that will pop out a new growth as well. So you've got 3 fronts on that plant that should produce new growths in the next growth season. Okay. Now, what size pot do I put this thing in? You don't want to overpot. If I were to put this in this pot, that's too big.
Too big.
Way too big. But definitely that size pot, okay? A 5 to 4 inch pot is perfect for this plant. Now with this one, there's not much of a root system there, so I'm putting a lot of the bark down in the bottom, and I'm gonna rest that plant. Remember, front and back on the orchid? Front is where the new growth is. The back is where the old growth is, okay? The back goes up against the edge of the pot. Do a rhizome clip. Now, obviously, this is a 6-inch rhizome clip. It's not going to fit in that 4-inch pot, so you're going to have to cut it off a little bit. And like I said, you're going to have to bend them sometimes. Sometimes they're really tight, sometimes they're really loose. Remember, I will always bend them down like that. It's to keep the pressure on that so that it locks itself in that pot and starts to regrow. All right, if I put that plant in that pot and that plant just sat there and started wiggling, what's gonna happen? Any new root tips that start growing out are gonna start rubbing on the bark. Those root tips are gonna die. So when you repot, you wanna make sure that that plant is in that pot, it's secure, and it doesn't wiggle. That plant's in there. I mean, it's not going anywhere. So that's what you're looking for when you repot a bigger orchid.
Thank you.
Okay?
What if you have pseudobulbs but no leaves? Can you?
If you have enough pseudobulbs, you can try to get them to rebloom. I'm easily going to get 4 plants out of this, if not 5. I don't have enough pots here, so I guess I have some potting to do at home tonight. Now, can I use this clipper on this?
Yes.
Yes.
Plant.
Yes, same plant. You can use it on this plant. All right. I'm looking for the new growth. Remember, when you're dividing this stuff, you're always looking for the new growths. You've got 2 over here, you've got 1 here, you've got 1 here, and you've got 1 here. So I'm going to try and go up the middle. We're going to go in this way. And I'm probably going to lose a couple of pseudobulbs doing this. Sometimes you get it right, sometimes you don't. I'm also going to take some of the dead pseudobulbs or leafless pseudobulbs off the back. Okay. One, two, there we go. There's the division. Finally made itself known. Okay, 2 more plants.
Nice.
Yes?
Would you ever take those 2 and put them in a bigger pot?
I could have taken this, left it alone, and stuck it in a bigger pot. I would have still had a bunch of ugly looking pseudobulbs on it. I'm trying to grow it back out to get more growth on it, so because it's off these growths that you're going to get flowers. You're never going to get flowers off these old pseudobulbs.
But would you take both of those and put them in a bigger
You could. I've done that before. I've done that with really weak divisions. I've gone back through and I have done that. Now I'm going to go back through and look at this and look at some of the pseudobulbs that are on the back end of it and decide whether or not I want to keep them on there, and I don't. I want to try and clean it up a little bit. That's as far as I can go. That's one good little plant. Okay, that would go in a 4-inch pot. Okay. The same with this one. You're going to look at this, look at the back end of it. You're always looking at the back end, seeing how many, pseudobulbs you've got back there. As long as this thing is still interconnected and they all can feed each other, you can take these back bulbs off. Okay, this one right here, I think. Yep. Let go. There we go. All right. Now, if I have a couple of pseudobulbs that are growing in a weird direction, I can trim them off. Like this one is growing in a weird direction, so I want to get rid of it.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
This is the one that's been passing around because
Okay.
of the eye. Can you show me where the eye is? 'Cause
Sure.
we're all talking about it down there.
Okay.
Thank you.
The eyes are that little itty bitty triangle right there. That one may be good, that one may be dead. But you can see a new eye right there.
Oh, okay.
Since you cut it back there, that eye is now going to swell up and start growing.
Oh, cool.
And
Thanks.
with that, because a lot of people didn't know, is that same thing, which is the front and which is the back that you're talking about?
The front is where the leaves are. The back is where the older leaves are, or where there are no pseudobulbs. So the back is here.
Oh, okay.
Okay. The front is up here.
Oh,
Actually, the front is right here.
okay.
This is going to be your front. Okay. You can put all of these in trees. Every last one of these could go up in a tree. I've got a gentleman out on the barrier island. I did 3,800 orchids in his landscape. Everything from dendrobiums to cattleyas to phalaenopsis to vandas to all kinds of other different orchid types. Full sun orchids, everything. I'm sorry? You don't put soil with them. I put them on there bare root, and I will pack some moss or Spanish moss around it to hold some moisture. When you do put them on trees, they should be watered on a regular basis. These just get ignored back here. So that just tells you what can happen if they just live off of what Mother Nature provides. Okay?
When you say plant them on trees, can they be planted on anything that has a trunk, so to speak?
Yes. Anything that has a trunk. You have a lot of types of palm trees that are considered self-cleaning palm trees, like Christmas palms, royal palms, fishtail palms, foxtail palms. They have a boot on them. You cannot put the orchid on the boots. You have to put it on the gray wood of the tree. So it has to have solid, wood to grow onto. Okay. Any tree that has exfoliating bark, you do not want to try and mount. They just won't attach. Okay. Yes.
I had attached 2 orchids to palm trees.
Okay.
Tried to get it where it got enough shade, but now it's just too bright. There's no way to move those, correct? They're
Sure.
all-
Yeah.
Oh, there is.
How big is it? What type of orchid is it?
Well, I don't know the type or the name. It's a fan out one that has red flowers on it.
Probably a cattleya.
I think so.
Okay.
I got it back down in Miami.
Okay. Cattleya, water it down. You're going to cut the roots at probably about 4 inches out from the plant. Just cut them, water it down, and then peel it off. When you peel it off, you want to put it somewhere else out on the property. You're going to have to tie it down tight so that when it grows the new growth, those new growths put out roots and will reattach. The part that you've pulled off is never going to reattach on its own. You're going to have to tie it on. Once the new growths come in and the roots start to grow and spread out like this guy's done, you can see the roots down here on the bottom. Some of the roots have gone down this way. This one's got roots all over. Once the roots are attached, then you can take whatever you're using to tie it on there off. Okay. All right. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 divisions out of that one plant. Okay.
And they will, all 5 will,
All 5 of these will grow.
will they bloom a year later?
Should bloom in about a year, yes.
What's the best thing to use to attach the orchid to?
Green stretch tape. I use green stretch tape. Some people used to use pantyhose. Pantyhose are pain in the behind. They get snagged on the bark on the trees. They, stretch a little too much, and it's hard to get the orchid on the tree tightly. The green stretch tape, and you'll see it on the phalaenopsis out there on the oak tree. A lot of those still have their green stretch tape on them from when I put them on there last year. Okay. How many of you were at the orchid mounting class July 2 years ago? We did a class here on mounting in the summer. Okay. There's an orchid in the front shade house that's on a piece of bamboo hanging in the shade house. We mounted that plant up there 2 years ago. It's been up in that shade house since then. It's very happy where it's at. It's now got probably 13 or 14 flower spikes on it. We put that on with zip ties. So that orchid is actually held on there with zip ties. Yes, ma'am.
I use fishing string, is that
You can use fishing string on inanimate objects like a mount like driftwood or like bamboo or something like that. If you use it on a live tree, the tree is going to grow and expand. That fishing string is eventually going to cut through your orchid. Okay?
I have a question. How long after you repot do you fertilize?
Right away.
Right away. What was
The week after I repot, they're already getting food. Now, typically when I do repot, where is it? I will take a slow release like this, and whenever I'm doing a repot on orchids, I will take this, and this is a yellow slow release. It's called Sunny Coat. This is made by Osmocote, but it is not Osmocote. It's called Sunny Coat or Dynamite. All right. If you use Osmocote on your orchids, it is going to burn the roots on your orchids. Do not use Osmocote on your orchids. And I will take any plant that I've repotted and I'll put about a tablespoon of this on each plant. All right. That gives them, every time they get water, they get a little bit of food, but that does not mean you cannot fertilize your orchids. You still have to fertilize them, okay?
How do you fertilize a hanging? I mean, one that you scrap.
With a hose and sprayer. I use a hose and sprayer, put my fertilizer in it, fill it up with water, attach the hose to it with a little bit of soap and spray it down, okay?
Is that fertilizer available here?
Which one?
The one you just said we should.
Yes.
What was it called again?
It's the houseplant bromeliad orchid food. It's a slow release pellet. And it is in the orchid room next to the Better Grow orchid fertilizer, okay? This is the old standard. Everybody knows to use this, right? I'm going to change your minds on that today. Okay. Anybody know Palmer's Orchids over in Sarasota? Robert Palmer is the head grower for Some Bulb. He has developed every one of those orchid fertilizer formulas for Better Grow. He's the man and the brains behind that stuff. Now, fortunately, Mr. Palmer has decided to come out with his own fertilizer. Anybody that has really gotten into orchids has been to a couple of presentations. They've heard about the Michigan State orchid fertilizer formula. That is basically that formula, except he's added seaweed to it. Probably one of the best fertilizers you will ever use. That is all I am using now. I don't use the other stuff. The Palmer's Orchid Special.
You use 1 tablespoon.
A tablespoon to a gallon of water. With that, you always want to use a spreader sticker with your formula or with your fertilizer. Spreader sticker will make that fertilizer stick to it. It's like you taking a shower in the morning, you put shampoo in your hair. If you don't rinse that shampoo out, you've got a film in your hair for the rest of the day, right? Okay? What you're doing is you're creating a film of fertilizer that sticks on the plant, stays there. So instead of you taking liquid fertilizer and just watering the orchid down and it just dripping off, it's now sticking to the plant. It's sticking to the roots, it's sticking to the leaves and the pseudobulbs. Okay?
What's the name of that product?
It's a spreader sticker. You can, it's available commercially. I have a bottle of it up there on the table. We have it in the front shade or in the gift shop. So it's just it's a surfactant. Spreader sticker. Anytime that you add a pesticide, a fungicide, or a fertilizer, you should be using a spreader sticker. It increases the effectiveness of that product that you're using.
Do you mix it with the fertilizer?
Yes. Mix it with the fertilizer, you mix it with the pesticide, you mix it with the fungicides. Okay? Do you use fungicide and pesticide at the same time? No. Do not. Use them separately. Let each one do its own job. This is an orchid. The tag is gone. I don't know what it is unless I've got a tag buried in here somewhere. This is an old orchid from down at Odom's. I know it's from Odoms because it's in that stupid Stay-Lite rock. I hate this stuff. Any orchid that I've seen that's been growing in Stay-Lite typically is trying to get out of it. Literally, they will grow out of it to get away from it. Now the back of this is pretty much dead. And that Stay-Lite rock is the worst thing for your clippers. It's horrible. All right, so that. Now, there's something about this plant that's different than some of the others. It's called a bifoliate. All right, it has 2 leaves on it. If it has just 1 leaf on it, like this guy, a little easier to repot. Doesn't really matter when you repot it. It doesn't get as fussy. This is a bifoliate. They get really ticked off when you repot them. Okay? Bifoliates, when they grow, they only grow roots off the new growth. All right? Once you disturb the roots on the rest of it, those roots are going to die, period. Dead. Done. A bifoliate, typically you want to repot it when it's got a new growth coming up and it's got several roots starting to come down. That means it will be able to feed itself. Now, this one, because I don't have any idea what it is anymore. And that happens. Squirrels get a hold of them. Birds will take your tags out of the pots. You know, there's all kinds of reasons why they will just disappear. This is why I hate Stay-Lite. I'm just going to rip it apart. Sometimes that's what you have to do. All right, there's my new plant. Right there.
So I have a stupid question.
And it's basically grown on top of the Stay-Lite. It doesn't have roots going down into it. It doesn't want to be in that stuff. I don't know why John uses Stay-Lite down in Fort Pierce because it's economical. It weighs the roots down in the plant and you don't have to repot as often. The only problem with Stay-Lite is it tends to stay wet. It has a real hard time, but this thing's not coming out of here.
What is Stay-Lite?
I'll show you in just a second. If I can get it out of here. Don't tempt me, because I might.
Oh, yeah.
Make sure I didn't get anybody, okay? Be careful when you do this. These pot pieces are sharp. They will cut you. Wow.
What is the ratio of your potting mix? The orchilite to the perlite?
1 part of perlite, 1 part of the clay ball, and 2 parts of bark. You can use just bark. That's a mess. Holy crap, that's a mess. All right, Stay-Lite is this gray rock coming out of this thing, okay? You're gonna see the inside of this. The roots in it are just pathetic. They've all grown on the outside. They're trying to get away from it. Orchiata is, John loves it because it's cheap, it's economical, and he doesn't have to repot as often. I don't like it because the orchids don't like it. I don't like it because it tears up my tools. And you can see I'm not being gentle. I mean, I really am not being gentle. I'm just tearing everything off of it. And no tag anywhere. And then the fun part is trying to get all the rock out of here, out of this root ball, to repot it. Yeah, it is easier if you wet them down before you go to repot them. The roots will give way a lot easier. Unfortunately, I don't have that option back here. You know, I could have brought a bucket of water back here, but I can't use that bucket on multiple orchids. So, you know, if it's just one orchid, you can soak it down and let it soak for a little while. This would come apart much easier. Yes. Yes, these videos are put on YouTube on the Busy Bee, what is it, the Busy Bee garden seminars. Yeah. So this one will be on there probably, what, in 2 months? Yeah. And then I have all the other seminars on there too that you can go back and watch.
Do the roots of the orchid simply anchor it, or do they feed the...
At this point, what's left on here is going to anchor it. The new growth is going to put out new roots. They are going to feed the plant. When you tear apart an orchid like this, you're going to set it back. And it's going to, when you divide it like this, you're going to lose most of this root ball. Because most of the root ball is here in the bin now. It's done. Wow. Okay. I'm going to try and go through and clean it up a little bit better. Those of you that are scared of the plumber's torch, don't be. It's really that simple. All you do is you put your clippers up here. If you see anything glowing orange on it, that's organic material. You've just sterilized it. Pardon me?
The chef's torch?
You can use a little creme brulee torch too. Yeah. Not a problem. All right. And there is still clay or stalite back up in here. Sid from Countryside Citrus has the old Indian River Orchids collection. He uses a grade of stalite that's a little bit bigger than this. He uses a 3/4 inch rock that's about like that. It's a little bit better than this. It has a tendency to dry out a lot better. It has more spaces between it. It doesn't stay soaking wet like this does. This it's really hard for it to dry out. You can water it and 4 days later you can take it out of the pot and the center of that rock is still wet. So the number one thing with orchids is you want to dry the roots out in between watering. You don't ever want to put them away wet. All right, so there's one division. All right, don't give me a hard time. Okay, you are going to give me a hard time. This is also why I go back to single edge razor blades.
You ever sharpen your clippers?
With the torch, I do. I do go through and sharpen them up, but these are 4 or 5 years old, so the big ones, it's a little bit harder. The edges, that's why I was looking to get some new ones. It's time. Those things are supposed to be guaranteed for life, so if I took it back to him, he would have probably replaced them. So he's really good about that. They're really good tools. Now, if you look at this root mass, you're going to see a bunch of wires. You're going to see a bunch of this. You're going to see white roots. The white roots are your active growing roots. These wires are actually the root, but the white part is the vellum that covers the root. If the roots are exposed and you see that little wire, then you want to trim those off and get rid of those. It's going to be a little difficult because there's so much here.
No, don't turn the light.
I'll never forget, I was dividing an orchid with stalks on it about that thick, and I was trying to do it with a single edge razor blade. And I did. I sliced right down my thumb.
Should you wear safety
You could probably do that, but I've been doing it with single edge razor blades for so long, I'm a little more sure of myself now.
Would you use a box cutter? Is the same? You could just like.
You could use a box cutter. The only problem with that is the box cutter itself, because it's going to come in contact. You could transfer virus onto that box cutter. So typically a single edge razor blade like that, yeah, and just throw it away. Okay. All right, that one's done. This hot mess. All right, same plant, same razor blade. Okay, 1, 2, 3. I can't hear you. You're gonna have to speak up.
Previously, when you were talking about using a hose sprayer for fertilizer,
Mm-hmm.
do you spray it on just the roots in the pot, or do you spray to the leaves as well?
Most of the absorption of your fertilizer is going to be through the root system. They will do a little bit of feeding through the foliage. That's why I'll use a spreader sticker with it. But I concentrate my fertilizer into the roots.
Even with valves?
Even with fails. Yep. All right. So 4 pseudobulbs on this thing. 1, 2, 3, 4. There's 5 pseudobulbs on here. I'm gonna take the last one off and try and get the weak part off of the plant. When you go to divide these guys, remember you're trying to make this plant as healthy as you can so that you get a good strong plant. If you've got a bunch of old pseudobulbs on the back that don't have leaves on them, the front of the plant is going to work to keep those back bulbs happy. Sometimes it's just wiser to go ahead and take that back bulb off. Okay. Typically I'll go through too when I'm repotting and clean up any of the paper that's on the pseudobulbs. Try and clean them up as best I can without damaging a new eye. Straighten them up a little bit and then clean the roots up. Is there stalite, Dylan? No, no more stalite in there. Okay. All right.
Did you say you wash the roots after you?
No,
No, you don't.
you do not put water on fresh cut roots.
Okay.
You wait about 4 days before you go through to water them.
Can you transfer disease and fungus for your ants when you're potting several different?
That's hotly debated. Some people do wear gloves. Some growers don't. Any of the growers that I've worked with, Tom Ritter, John Odom, has not been using gloves. A lot of people are going to them so that you don't transfer anything from your hands. When you go to repot these guys and you put them down on a pot, you don't use a tamping tool either. So,
I was changing my gloves every time I did a plant.
were you?
Yeah.
See, the old growers never did any of this. That's why you'll find a lot of old growers with virus in their collections, just because they didn't know any better at the time. Now we do know better. So most people are going through and doing something to prevent that. A lot of people will put newspaper down. The orchid that they're working on, once they're done, they'll pick up that bunch of newspaper and throw it away. Yes, ma'am. Typically, you can test for it, but the main virus that you're going to see is going to be color break, and you'll see the flowers where they get this blotchy, different coloring in the flower, and then you definitely know you've got virus in it. Virus is spreadable from plant to plant, from contact from a dirty tool, from also thrips, insects will transfer virus. How many of you smoke? Anybody smoke? Wow. That's amazing. That is amazing. Look, my mother died at 39 from emphysema from 2 packs of menthol cool cigarettes a day. To see nobody raising their hand that they smoke is wonderful. If you smoke, you should not be handling your orchids unless you sterilize your hands. Tobacco smoke can transmit a virus called tobacco mosaic virus to your orchid. How many of you grow tomato plants? Wash your hands before you touch your orchids. Tomatoes also can transfer a virus to your orchids.
And it just sounds like they are so strong but fragile, and I'm just like, can I be rough with them? I don't. Sometimes they seem fussy, but other times they seem indestructible.
Orchids pretty much are indestructible. I mean, if you look at these poor things, they've been sitting back here on their own for a year, if not 2 years now. I don't do anything to them, and they're just going to town. The fails in the oak tree, all we do is water them every morning. Every once in a while, I'll go through and spray them down with a hose and sprayer with a little bit of fertilizer in them. Okay? Orchids are extremely strong. They're designed to live out in the wild, mounted up on rock cliffs, on trees. You know, they don't get food, they don't get anything extra but what Mother Nature gives them. Okay? The way that they feed themselves in the wild is they develop a bigger plant and you get a root mass, and all of a sudden you start getting all this stuff falling in the root mass. It starts to decompose slowly, it feeds them.